Rest in natural great peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural great peace. But sometimes it's wonderful when you really remember what the masters have done and taught. It immediately moves us. It really inspires, connects us. Therefore, we feel a sense of gratitude and appreciation of their work. So, using Rinpoche in this wonderful poem, he says, "Rest in natural great peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural. In Tibetan is Rangi Hwacham. Rest in natural great peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural great peace. To rest, to find rest. Clear? Just really that finding that rest, that comfort and ease, to let go and to naturally be. Then you see the mind just quietly settle, just like a glass of muddy water. If you don't stir it, the dirt will slowly settle. In the same manner, if you let the mind be in the spacious openness, slowly the confusion or the turbulence of thoughts and motion settles. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural great peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural great peace. To rest, to find rest. Clear?
as we hold ourselves in silence. Knowing full well that there is no separateness. It was the delusion that kept us creating differences. But ultimately, we are the same. Holding yourself in this silence, one recognizes that the capacity for being here is that all hearts are connected here. All hearts are connected here. So I hope that piece that Sogni Rinpoche was reading, I've forgotten his name, the poet that wrote it, but it is a great piece of work. And I hope you appreciate it and see that somehow that this piece that we are, it's not something we create, it's something that is. And we begin to bring more and more awareness to the truth of peace. It's not something manufactured, it's something that is recognized. Just like these practices are not something, in a sense, we do, it's something that we are, becomes available to us. Just through the silence and through our intention to be present and hopefully not too many wandering thoughts, but I know that's kind of the game, so don't feel bad. It's just nature. And also peace is nature. It's something that is can be something that holds all things, and not necessarily something we attain. It's something we already are, but we have to recognize it and begin to live it on some level. So we're going to take a break here, just maybe 5 minutes or something like that. And then we'll come back, and I never know what I'm going to do for sure, so something will happen. And hopefully it all works. So thank you. So my babble tonight will be based on one of my old poems that, or whatever it is, that I wrote many moons ago, but it still holds. Mind, heart, scrub. Mind, heart, scrub. Old rag. Heart kindly bent towards ease. Mind, heart, scrub. Old rag. Heart kindly bent towards ease. So I really, I don't know, this is kind of the mind, heart, scrub. To me, that's all about what we do here in the sense of the actual practice itself. You know, because essentially this is a purification process. The mind itself, as you well know, is fickle. It keeps on running after all sorts of things or ideas or feelings. And in that process, it can get very complex because there is liking and disliking. And fundamentally what we're trying to do here is find that place in the middle. They use the language of upekkha or equanimity or the center point. Those all work fine. And our practice here is based on trying to find that center point. Now, what's disturbing is in the mind-heart scrub is all the babble that goes on. You know, you sit there and, yes, we sat, I like that, sitting quietly for a bit of time. There's still stuff going on. You know, ideas, thoughts, memories, plans, fantasies, who knows? You know, it's just a lot of, can I use the language, mental gymnastics that we actually perform when we're supposed to be sitting there doing nothing, you know? Is that great? You know? It's just what is. It's okay. You know, it's the idea here is not that it doesn't happen, because that just happens. But our practice is not to be bothered by what it is that's going on. And that's the big deal, not to be bothered by what's going on. And it's really that, what I call still point, or that point in the center, or that holds all things. And so we can actually begin to not be bothered by all things. And yet, you know, where are these histories? Everybody here in this room, you are carrying a lot of history. And that history, you know, it either defines you or defines someone else, or somehow creates a, you know, it is kind of a trance that we walk around in. And if you haven't noticed, that's who you are. You are mostly a trance. Once in a while you get a few, you know, good insights and go, wow, now I know something, or I let go of something. But the rest of it is just trance and babble, you know. We babble to ourselves, we babble to others. We think somehow we know something. And I guess I sit here questioning, what is it that you know? You know? And what's worth knowing? You know? And I'm not saying, because I think there's a lot of great, mental fodder mind gymnastics that go on. And that's true. It is. It's fabulous. You can think, you know, and many creatures don't have that advantage, but we kind of overly, you know, rely on that, and it causes a lot of suffering, not just for ourselves, but for others as well. And the idea here, and this is why it's so, what's so wonderful and important here, is that the silence itself is the fundamentals. You know, is please get out of your own way. You know, you going around just making up shit, excuse me, about all sorts of things, and causing yourself and others confusion or suffering. And the idea here is stop it. You've done it enough, you know. What can you do now that actually makes this all work, you know? And so I go to this thing. It's a simple thing, you know, called compassion, that is the fundamentals of how this actually works, you know. Yes, it works to release things, obviously, you know, and I'm very happy to say it works great, you know. I like the translation of the word vipassana, to see into the subtle, you know. It's to see into the subtle. And that's the function here, is to see into the subtle. But, of course, the subtle is something underneath everything else. So there's a lot going on that isn't subtle. And we have to get to that subtle. And I think it was so important to, you know, to sit in the morning, to bring your attention to steadiness, so that there can be a sense of perception. And that perception is what? Oh, it's about seeing into. And I hope, you know, of course it begins with the gross, but it can go to the subtle. And the subtle is usually just, you know, it's sort of like looking at still water. And yet there's still, if it's a large enough pool of water, that water is moving, you know. And that's subtle, you know. It's not waves. It can be, but it's not so subtle, you know. But when it's really calm and there is a steadiness there, then it's our capacity to see into. And I think, you know, what do we see into? Okay, first there's and I use the language, the fickle mind, this never-ending, what is it, comparing? We just go around comparing all the time and somehow thinking that we'll get free through comparing. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. You know, it's can bring some insight and stuff into things, but it's not going to free you. And what we're talking about here and what we're really looking towards is that there is freedom. It is not, this is not a fantasy. This is something that, you know, for 2,600 years, the Buddha said, oh, I got this. And so he tried to explain it and give some very simple and direct truths about how it works. And that's pretty much it, you know. And then we have to figure out who we are. You know, this is something that I wish I could say you were just given it. But the truth is, you have to, in some sense, create the need. And I'm sorry to say that this is where kind of the old rags come in, you know. And they are the places that we have been harmed or have harmed others, or we know as this word dukkha or suffering. And suffering, it would be nice to say, oh, it doesn't, get over it. No, it's part of what's here. If you're in human form, you will experience suffering, And the suffering can either be a teaching or it can be a problem. And what I'm trying to point at is, oh no, this is a great teaching. You have all suffered many different ways, and some of it is buried. It is underneath life that you're living, and yet you're reacting to things. Why? Well, because of the past, and because there was suffering, and that suffering created an identity, and that identity created this incredible, brilliant mind that compares all the time. And somehow that comparing is not freedom. Actually, that comparing creates more waves on the water, And the idea here is we want to bring it to a place where the water is still, and we can see to the bottom. When it's stirred up, we can't see. And Sogni Rinpoche, who was doing that reading at the beginning, if you stir muddy water, what do you get? Muddy water. And you cannot see. And this idea of creating a kind of stillness that creates a possibility of seeing into the deep, And you are deep. You are. There's no question about that. It's just that you're always kind of moving away from it or figuring out something else to do, or somehow you think you have solutions. But really, there's only the stillness. And the stillness actually has the answers. The other does not. It just comparison. It just keeps kind of regenerating itself over and over. And we can learn very simply to begin to love the stillness and the silence and realize that, oh, it's not a problem. And I think a lot of our culture actually finds it to be a problem. But you're here because you're a little smarter than that, actually. And I give you credit to that. And, you begin to see that that old rag that you've been dragging around is not going to free you. What is going to free you is actually to come to a place of stillness and begin to recognize. You have to recognize, it's not something that is obvious in some ways, that there is peace. And peace means, oh, I'm not comparing, I'm not adding to what's here. I'm simply not. So, old rag, it's still, it's nice to think that we let go and don't mess with it. But, I know that you all mess with it, little or a lot. But when you do mess with it, you get a pointer, because when you mess with it, the old rag, you suffer, whether it's a story from the past or a relationship or a person or something that has tripped you up or something you wanted to get done but didn't get done. All of that is part of that old rag. It's just like old stuff that has kept you somehow entranced, thinking somehow if you can outthink it, you'll be fine. And I'm sitting here to say you can't outthink it. What you can do is sit still. And it sounds, I don't know, unproductive. Well, it is. Completely unproductive. And yet, what comes out of it is a great truth that somehow the old rag, the old story, the many different difficulties you've had were all teachers. You know, they weren't something that was. We're humans. We've been doing it over and over again. And here you have a chance to say, oh no, I think I got a little bit of it. Maybe I won't do it this time, you know? And then you find yourself doing it. It's really sometimes very discouraging, you know? But it also is a possibility. And if you don't see it, then there's nothing to do. There is just repetition. But if you see it and you begin to, you know, in a sense, it's just the ability to recognize. And you begin to recognize, and as you begin to recognize, then you have choice. If you don't recognize, you don't have choice. You know, you just follow that instinctual, you know, I want this, or I don't want that, or I like this, or I don't like that. All that, and it's very instinctual. But it's not going to free you. You know, you have to actually make the effort to see. And when I say to see, it means that you have the capacity or the wherewithal to recognize what it is that's occurring. And if it's not something that you know or see, it's a little hard, you know? So it's why the practice of meditation, in the sense that, we have to have insight into the subtlety of things. And if we can have insight into the subtlety of things, and that means all feelings, all stories, all of it, that if we don't see that, there's a problem. If we see that, we have the possibility of choice. And if you have choice, then I know you're all really smart. You know, you're intelligent, you got it. But you have to then act as such, you know. And I know, I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, and I'm very grateful for them. You know, they brought me great teachings, and there was enough intelligence there to kind of pull me out of it and through it, and end up sitting here. You know, that's pretty good, as choices go. But anyway, back to this, you know, what's it? Mind, heart, scrub, which is really about purification and seeing into the ferocity of our mental contractions, you know, and they may be mental contractions, but they also are, that's the contracting part of it. They also, you know, they reach out and grasp. And so we have this kind of battle going on within us, is one is grasping and the other's pushing away. And we kind of miss there's this center point that's not anything. You know, in Buddhism we have this fabulous word, which is ridiculous. It's called emptiness, you know. But what is it empty of? Oh, it's empty of any inherent existence. Oh my God, that sounds really big, you know? But it means, I'm just going to get off of the, you know, skateboard or whatever you're on that's sliding along and say, no, I don't have to do that. You know? I don't have to go there. You know, what I have to do is choose not to go there. And that's the big difference. You know, choose not to go there. And it's a bit challenging because it's not your instinct is, oh, I'm going to go for that pleasant, or I'm going to push away that unpleasant. And this is saying, no, neither one are right. You know, there's another place, another thing to do here. And that place is not. It's empty of any inherent existence. Okay? So, we're not creating something, and we're not dissolving something, we're not chasing something, we're not thinking somehow this is going to do it for me, you know. And I'm saying, no, that's not the way it works. The way it works is this very simple truth. Can I learn to just simply let go? You know, it's not complicated, and it's not fancy, and it doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles. It's just learn to let go, you know. And you have to learn how to let go. That means that what is the feeling like? And it is different than, you know, the wanting or the disliking, or it's neither that nor that. You know, it's this place in the center that holds everything, but it's not of them. You know, it's a fabulous place, and I really think that, you know, this particular, you know, this see into the subtle is a necessary practice. Unfortunately, our nature is, it would be nice to say, oh, if you just could do it. But you have to be, in a sense, the Buddha was quite explicit in the fact that it has to be taught to you on some level. We're kind of, I was going to say stupid, but it's true. We are kind of, you know, we think that somehow by getting the pleasant we'll be okay, we'll be happy. And if we just keep the unpleasant away, then we'll be happy. And this is saying, no, that's a battle. That's a battle. You're not going to win this battle, I'm sorry. You know, you just simply have to, in a sense, kind of turn the whole thing around and see that this is much simpler than that. And yet, nobody said it was going to be easy. That's maybe the tricky part of this is that, no, it's not necessarily easy, because instinctually, you want the pleasant, and you think it will bring you happiness. And if you keep the unpleasant away, you think that'll bring you happiness. And unfortunately, that's not the way it works. You know, I mean, it is, we are addictive beings, and we have to get over some part of that to find this middle way, they call it, this, not to be in a trance of liking or disliking, but actually be in a position to simply not, you know. And maybe it's why emptiness was such a, you know, for Western, particularly for us, we've been achievers as far as cultures go. And in some ways, we have done a tremendous job. In another way, we have suffered and caused suffering in great proportion. And I think when I look at the world today, I go, oh my God, what have we done, you know? It's, you know, I love this country. It's absolutely fabulous, you know. But oh my God, where are we right now? You know? It's like, holy smoke. all this for this? No, wait a minute, you know. But I think we can learn, you know. This is what you're doing in this room right now. You're here to learn that you're not gonna, you know, be the great conqueror or the, you know, the one who does this or that. You know, what you can do is just learn to let go. You know, I know it sounds kind of corny, but you know, that's all it is learning how to let go. And it's not fancy, and it's not, you know, it doesn't have a lot of color or whatever. It's just simply something in your, you know, I'm going to say, eventually will come, and I'm there in the sense of DNA. It's like, oh, I know how to do this. And I believe you know how to do this. But you keep being, I love the word, somebody brought it up to me, bamboozled. You know, you are bamboozled into thinking somehow, oh, if I get this, then I'll be happy. And how long did that last? You know, it's pretty simple. It's not great. So, mind, heart, scrub, old rag, kindly bent towards ease. Kindly bent towards ease. That's not too complicated, is it? Kindly bent towards ease. You know, you're all big hearts. I know that. You know, and you have that instinctually as part of you. And we're here, first of all, to do a little, you know, oh boy, I got myself into pretty deep and stuff. And I want to get out of it, you know? Well, how are you going to get out of it? Oh, well, if I just sit here and shut up and not try to be this or that, but actually just sit in the center of myself, then I have this possibility. I'm not wrestling, I'm not going towards something, I'm not trying to be more than whatever it is, but I do have to let go. And if I let go properly, then heart kindly bent towards ease. And this is the result of all this, is somehow the kindly bent towards ease. Why not? You got something else better to do? I don't think so. I think that, you know, we live in a world where comparison and suffering and desire and is so prevalent, you know, even in this great grand USA, you know, that still doesn't do it. You know, we have to find that place. And that place that is based on a good heart. You know, I see that that's, what is awakening? Oh, awakening is knowing that your heart is all hearts. And all hearts actually want the same thing. There's not so much difference, you know. And yet, because of fear and greed and all the other things, there's a lot of competition. And that competition is not going to bring you freedom, nor anybody around you. It's just going to create more stuff, you know. And we need to get over this, you know. You've been chasing, I was going to say chasing your tail, but I can't say that. So But I can say you have been chasing this world of pleasant and unpleasant, believing somehow that you will create your great happiness through pleasure and through, terrific experiences. Well, I'm sorry. This is simpler than that, You can find it, but it is, when they talk about equanimity and they talk about, it's kind of sitting in the center of things. And instead of trying to move forward or backwards or to the right or to the left, you just stay in the center. And if you can stay in the center long enough, then you will find this simple truth. Peace exists. It is not made or manufactured. It's something that is inherent, something that is always there. But due to our, I would say, confusion, you go chasing after, some idea that, now I'm going to have pleasure. Or I'm going to, I'm going to push that away because I will suffer if I do that. And the truth is, neither one of them is true, If you can just sit in the center. You got it? I'm sorry, this is nothing fancy. And, it's really, I was thinking, one of the things I love, of course, Thailand and being there, and I loved living in Nepal for 4 years and traveling in India for years. And, there was always that truth that you would see these Buddhas with all the stuff. I don't have them here, but they had all kinds of rainbows and stuff around them, And that's, that's not fantasy. That's, it's like, because there is desire, there are flames and disruptions. And if there was no desire for or against things, then these Buddhas would not be influenced. There would be nothing around them. But because of those states, then they are. And because they are, it gives us something to work with. And you all have had, I'm sure if I went around and talked to you, I would find out that there was a lot of suffering in your life, known or unknown, accepted or unaccepted. But it was there because it came from the fact that you were born into an imperfect world that somehow we thought we could have some perfection in. But I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. We come in, we get knocked around, and then each of us in some way has to wake up. It's not a given. It's something that maybe I know when I was young, if you have some insight, I know where I'm going. But most people don't know where they're going. They're just stumbling along. And I know it would be nice to just say, it's all laid out for you, but it's not. But you can do this, you can do this. You can wake up. It is not something that is only for a certain breed of people. It is common to all human beings. And that means that you have to have recognized kind of the polarities and found that there was something in the center that was not influenced by all that. And that you began to trust more and more that center. And as you trusted that center, you yourself become, first, not a problem, it's important, and then you become someone who holds that, what was it I said? Heart kindly bent towards ease. A heart kindly bent towards ease. Why not? This is, I was going to say, this is all I know. And it's all I've ever taught because, I came to this in the, 19 years old or something like that. And I went off to, overland to India and Nepal and looking for, well, first it was about dope, but and then I got kind of over myself. I remember, I said, okay, no more of this. I'm not going the right direction. And I haven't been for some time. That was the 60s, And I wasn't, and I got it. Oh, I went, oh, you know what? I gotta wake up here, And then I realized how difficult it was. And then here I am 40, 50 years later, still trudging along. Now I have my poles. As I hit my 80s here, it's going, oh my God, I'm still trudging. And, but I am a little part of me is awake. And I wish that for each one of you, because there was a lot of suffering here. And I certainly suffered a lot. And I suspect that if I could sit down with you, I would find the same truth, And that you came here because you understood that suffering was not the inherent truth. The inherent truth is that you have the capacity to awaken. And I am thrilled that you are here. Because not for 1 minute do I think you're going to, you could fall back into suffering. But once you know, you can't stop knowing. You know that. Once you know, you can't stop knowing. No matter what you think or what you fall back into or whatever. No. That's not going to happen, I'm sorry. You're going to maybe get beat up a little, and then you'll go, oh, I know where I'm going. And you will go there. And I'll be over here cheering you on. So, I'm going to do a little metta here, and then Jen's going to do some announcements. But I wanted first, if you have a question that doesn't need 20 minutes to answer, or we'll be here all night, then maybe we can do something together. So if you have questions, not that I can answer them, but we can at least explore it a little.
Great. And if you'll raise your hand, I'll pass the microphone so that our friends who are on Zoom can hear what's being said in the hall. And if anyone on Zoom would like to ask a question, please do raise your hand. Okay, in the back. You start with your name.
My name's Eric. So I'm very familiar with the muddy water and the concept of stirring the muddy water. And yeah, makes perfect sense. If you stir, I meant to say stir. If you stir muddy water, you will get more muddy water. And I like the concept of let it be, leave it alone, be still, let it settle. My question is, if you have perception and you're staring down through the now clear water and you see, let's say, to the bottom, what's there? What do you see?
Good question. You know, it's not what you see. It's what is looking. You know? So you begin to see, there's no longer the particles that are stirring it up, but there is clarity. And so it's not about the bottom. It's about the stillness that is created through the non-particles. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So to me, that's the most important part. Is it what's at the bottom has always been there. You know, between your seeing and that, there is learning to be done. And that's what I'm interested in. You know, what is the learning that you have when the water is clear and the bottom is clear, but it's more about the non-particles, you know, than otherwise. Make sense? Yeah.
Okay. Start with your name.
Hi, my name is Barbara, and I don't know if this is really along the lines of what you're saying, but I'm going to hear deeper. So we have this suffering, or babble, and part of the suffering is the outside world, and I don't know about you guys, but I still feel like there's pain inside of me, and I totally am aligned with everything you're saying. I'm finally, the nut is cracking, you know, but as my nut is cracking, I'm just trying to figure out how to be with that healing. Do you have anything you can add to that? Because the monkey minds, I call it, come in, you know, the Wizard of Oz. You know?
I hear you. And the thing is, this world is really based on suffering. You know?
Yeah.
That's maybe an understatement. But that's what it is. And so in a way, can we learn to be something that is not that? You know, because of the world, it's been suffering since beginningless time. And it seems to get more complicated as we go along. But the truth is, you are not that. You know, you are subject to it maybe, but even if you're subject to it, you don't need to buy it, you know. And it's one of the truths about the news is that it's all bad, you know, from that point of view, you know. And so how can you know but still not get swallowed by? And that's my answer to you. Don't get swallowed by it. It's you are more than any of the stories, any of the news. And that's what you have to rely on. Because, you know, when I said, what's the last line there? Heart kindly bent towards ease. You know, that's pretty simple, isn't it? Heart kindly bent towards ease.
Can I just say one thing? So when you have an influence like a child that is suffering, and I think I'm holding the higher level space, but wow, like it's just like I feel it and I'm suffering when it's really not my suffering, quote unquote. I mean, we're all suffering and connected, but I'm really challenged with that. My heart is really open and I'm empathetic, and then it's hard to explain, but I'm trying to figure out how to be like, I can do this. I'm watching somebody not making the best decisions, and my heart just feels it, and then I'm suffering for that. You know what I mean? Am I making sense?
I absolutely know what you mean. And I also, where'd my glasses? Can't see. I also believe that when we find peace in ourselves, that it actually can handle the chaos. How's that? You know, and I believe that. And it's not that, you know, I'm callous. I'm actually sensitive to the suffering. But I'm not getting lost in it. I'm going, oh, how do I hold myself in the midst of suffering?
Peace. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So, let's see, where are we? We're at time here. So I just want to do a little metta because, you know, the heart knows. And we have to bring the energetics into the heart and know that, first of all, you are love. There is not much else out there, you know, just its opposite. And so just to hold yourself in peace and love and care. And as you hold yourself in this peace and love and care, also extend it out. So we can hold the whole room with this marvelous intention of awakening and loving kindness and non-comparison. Just sitting in the center of ourselves, knowing we are in the center of this collective sitting here. You are more than your thoughts. Just holding all beings everywhere. Beings everywhere, they suffer. And our capacity to hold the center without falling into them or moving away from them. It is an art.